And I'll go ahead and pass it off to Sabrina.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for spending some time here together. And I see some lovely familiar faces that bring me smiles and make me a little nervous to have you on the other side of the camera, but I love it. I know you're cheering me on. So during this time together, we have an hour and a half together. I'll be using slides only for about 15 minutes just to give a little idea, a little background of what we're talking about today, how culinary medicine fits in, how the deliciousness and nutritional aspects of lamb fit into our eating pattern. And then I'm going to do a cooking demo of 2 recipes today and using 2 different cuts of American lamb. So with that, Carly, could you please start the slideshow? Thank you. Perfect. So again, we're talking today about how American lamb fits into a healthful American diet. And again, I'm Dr. Sabrina Falquier. I have multiple hats. I'm a physician. I'm an educator at 2 universities in San Diego, culinary instructor, speaker, consultant, podcast host, culinary medicine, lifestyle medicine, internal medicine physician, and the proud founder and CEO of Sensation Salud, which is a culinary medicine education and consulting company. For disclosures, I am currently the board chair of 2 nonprofits. One is a National Culinary Medicine Specialist Board, and another one is a local San Diego-based nonprofit called Olivewood Gardens and Learning Center. I want to make sure that y'all know that, yes, I am a physician, but I'm not your physician. So all information shared is for informational purposes only and should not replace your medical home. And most importantly, I love delicious food. Next slide. Today, during our time, we're going to, and not just during the slideshow, but during the demo as well, we're going to explore the American dietary patterns and the health problems that arise along with them. I'm going to explain healthy eating patterns and their long-term health benefits, and then examine American lamb's role in a healthy eating pattern by understanding its abundant nutritional properties. And then we're going to switch over to the cooking demonstration, and I'm going to demonstrate practical and culturally relevant recipes through a cooking demonstration utilizing widely available and affordable cuts of American lamb. So to begin, I'm definitely not your typical doctor, or at least not anymore. For almost 16 years, I was an internal medicine primary care doctor at a multi-specialty medical group in San Diego, California. And in 2016, I learned about culinary medicine, and I was so taken aback that there was this space where really we were doing evidence-based medical care, yet bringing food front and center to help people, to empower people to really use food in a way to help their health move in a positive direction. And I've always loved food, and to finally have the space where I was able to combine my love of cooking and my career in medical practice. So then I also feel like there's a lot more of my color that came out. The picture on the right is actually at one of the nonprofits that I'm on the board chair of at Olivewood Gardens. And it really is the space where when we're in the kitchen, there's such intimacy that we share with the love that we have of food, and the space really allowed that empowerment and my full colors to come through. And I think that has helped the people I work with to let their full colors come through as well. Next slide. And as we go into this, I just want to touch base a little bit on the terms diet versus eating pattern. A lot of times when we talk about a diet, there's this sense of restriction, like you're either on the diet or off the diet. And I really like to use more the term of eating pattern. There was a time I was at a used bookstore with my kids, and the only chair in that bookstore was actually in the diet section. And it was quite full. And it just sat in the chair, and I was looking around at all these books. And just this reminder that the goal here is to find an eating pattern that is sustainable and delicious for us as individuals. We all have different loves of spices or herbs. We grew up in different places. We have a different relationship that we've had with food throughout our lives, and to honor that. So again, the goal here is to go towards a pattern of eating that really enforces and helps our health, rather than feeling like we're on this restrictive diet. And I'm doing air quotes with that one. Next slide. Now, going back almost a century now, so the American dietary patterns Essentially, we're going to summarize 90 years in one slide. So over the last 90 years, so in the 1930s, there was an increase in availability of refrigeration that started in the 1930s, and it allowed this opportunity to store food a lot longer. With this, and over the decades, came this increase in portion sizes and also this increase in processed and ultra-processed foods. We've been told, or recommendations given by the government for many decades. On the right, you see a very old US government chart that had these 7 groups. And of course, we've migrated to the pyramid and now the government food plate. And this is based on scientific evidence that comes out. These are updated every 5 years, and there really are a lot of big changes that have taken place because of scientific-based information that comes through. And that initial dietary guidelines came out in 1980. And the dietary recommendation was to eat a diet low in fat. And from that came a lot of this processed and ultra-processed food. Next slide. Now we're going to fast forward about 70 years. I'm doing quick math there, from the 2000s to now. And what's lovely that we've seen over the last 2 decades is this increase in desire for making responsible choices. So this knowledge of the country of origin of our food, this desire to understand how an animal was raised and who is behind the person raising the animals as well. And then also focusing on whole food focused society. And also we have much more educated consumers because of that desire for knowledge and the availability of knowledge out there through social media and webinars like this one. People are a lot more aware of the food choices that they're making and asking to have much more transparent pieces of information when they choose to make their food or beverage choices. And going a little bit to the kind of bad news of what we see as the top 10 causes of death in the US. If you see this list going top down, we have heart disease, and the numbers, the bars, the dark blue is 2020, and then the green is 2021. And don't worry about the exact numbers, it's just more kind of these top 10. So we have heart disease, cancer, COVID, unintentional injuries, stroke, chronic lower respiratory diseases, so things like COPD or emphysema, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, chronic liver disease and cirrhosis, and the last one we have there is kidney disease. Most of those have or are affected by food choices that we make, and also by the lifestyle choices that we make. So how we move our body, what our relationship is with alcohol or other substances. So the main point that I want you to take away from this as we look at this list and we're talking about food choices, to realize that there's a lot that we can do to change them. We need to know why to put the effort in and what to change to, or how to create those patterns that really do help solidify our health, both in the present and into the future. Next slide. So then going to these science-based eating patterns, there is a lot of information out there about nutrition. And again, because of social media and so much more access to information, it can be incredibly overwhelming in how to know what is a credible piece of information. This study by Trickapolo that was published in 2003 in the New England Journal of Medicine is one of the keystone articles in culinary medicine. And what this looks at, this is out of Greece, and it looks at this Mediterranean pattern of eating using a 9-point scale. So the 9 points are: number 1, vegetables; number 2, fruits and nuts, which are lumped together; number 3, legumes, which are anything that grows in a pod. So things like edamame, beans, lentils. The 4th one is cereals, specifically whole grains. The 5th one is fish, with recommendation of having fish at least twice a week. The 6th one is meat and meat products, where having less than 4 ounces per day is the recommendation, and the less processed, the better. The 7th one is dairy products, where again, the goal is less than 7 ounces per day and the focus on fermented dairy. So things like cheeses or yogurt or kefir. The 8th one is alcohol in moderation. And when this study came out, the recommendation was 1 alcoholic beverage for women per day and 2 for men if one does not have any issues with alcohol. The goal with that is not to save it for the weekend. It really is 1 a day and really intended to be eaten with a meal. And then the last one is olive oil. Again, olive oil in this study, but it's really looking at which oil somebody is using to cook with. And why this study was so important in the world of culinary medicine is that if you had somebody who didn't normally eat vegetables, or they, after conversations with them, they decided to start eating beans or lentils on a regular basis, that would give them 2 additional points. So essentially, this is something that you can find an easy survey online and find out how many points you're starting with and decide, okay, I'm going to make a goal to either have less dairy products, which would give you a point, or again, add vegetables or legumes, and that would give you a point. And a 2-point improvement decreases the risk of mortality by 25%. So risk of mortality is risk of death of any cause. So that right there is incentive to add some of these pieces into your eating pattern. Next slide. And then another way of thinking about, so there's the points, but most of us eat on plates. So what I like about the plate method, which is whole food focused. So thinking of that upper part of the plate, so half your plate being fruits and vegetables, and really thinking about variety of both color and also different parts of the plant. And so what I mean by that is including some root vegetables like beets or different color potatoes. And then we go to the stem, like something like celery. And right now, kind of the end of summer in most of the northern hemisphere, where you have all the fruits that we eat as vegetables. Again, those are all different varieties. And then of course you have all your leaves. So all of those, adding different variety, not having to memorize, oh, if I have bad eyes, I need orange food and that gives me vitamin A. We don't need to go that granular, and that's leaving it a step back and really thinking about broad strokes. And then for protein, again, being that 1/4 of the plate and focusing on whole muscle animal protein or plant-based protein. And then for carbohydrates or grains, 1/4 of the plate. So we have whole intact grains and again, complex carbohydrates in there as well. Next slide. And then why these patterns? So each of these bullet points is related to at least one evidence-based study. And so broad strokes of why that pattern of eating, either thinking of the plate method or those points, that point scale. So number one, that first bullet point is a decrease and prevention of heart disease, both including hypertension or high blood pressure, heart attack, or stroke. So essentially people who added olive oil or nuts on a regular basis had lower risk of having an initial heart attack or stroke. The next one is the Leo Heart Trial, which showed a decreased chances of a second heart disease event. So if somebody had a heart attack or stroke, and before they were discharged from the hospital, they learned about that pattern of eating, they had a statistically significant reduction in having a second event, which is pretty amazing. The next one is lower dementia risk. The next one is lower cancer risk. The next one is a decrease or reversal of type 2 diabetes. And the last one there is a longer life expectancy. So all things that I would hope everyone on this call is hoping for in their life. Next slide. Now we're going to switch over to lamb nutrition specifically. Next slide. And when we look at lamb nutrition facts, essentially we are look at the ounces, so 3 ounces of American lamb. And that is when we think of that plate method, 3 ounces would be about 1/4 of the plate. So that fits that criteria perfectly. And that right there already has 23 grams of protein. We tend to eat 2 to 3 times the amount of protein that our body needs on a day-to-day basis. If you want to do higher math, essentially most people need 0.8 grams per kilogram of weight of protein. So if you have somebody who's 150 pounds, they need close to 50 grams of protein. So that 3 ounces of American lamb would be half the amount of protein they need in the day. And then as far as fat, what I want to highlight here is that lamb has an incredible amount of both monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, which are the healthy fats. So sometimes we like to think of foods as having all good or all bad fats, and often they're in combination. So yes, it is a red meat and it has saturated fat, but it actually has more of that monounsaturated fat than it does the saturated fat. And again, it also has that polyunsaturated. It has cholesterol, which actually has less cholesterol than an egg, and then low in sodium at 69 milligrams. It's also an excellent source of immune supporting nutrients, including zinc, selenium, riboflavin, niacin, vitamin B12, and also a good source of iron and vitamin B6. And then when we think of lamb, of course, there are a lot of different parts to the animal. There are 3 different cuts that are the leanest, and that's the leg, the loin, and the shoulder. And what does lean mean? So essentially it means there's less than 10 grams of total fat, there's less than 4.5 grams of saturated fat, and less than 95 milligrams of cholesterol and 160 calories. You'll notice I don't talk about calories much in my work because my focus is really thinking about food as a whole space rather than kind of calorie counting. And that makes me think of that being on the diet. Next slide. So then when we talk about different dishes, this is, looking at the balanced plate eating pattern. So this is lamb lob. This is a recipe that I developed for this project, and it'll be available on the lamb website shortly. And here we have a quarter of your plate of protein, and this is ground American lamb, very lean. Then half the plate is vegetables, including what's in the recipe itself, and also meant to be served with cucumbers and lettuce. And then in it, there's onions and peppers as well. And then a quarter plate is grains. And lob is actually made with toasting raw rice, and that's crunchy, and you grind it, and that's within the dish itself. And then you can also serve it with rice of your choice. And then also lots of seasoning. So you have citrus and fish sauce and herbs that just make this jump. So essentially it ends up being this really light, delicious meal. And the balancing of those flavors between the flavor, the rich flavor of the lamb combined with that citrus, it just is absolutely heaven. Next slide. And then looking at a different dish, now to a different part of the world. So lamb lob is a Thai dish from Thailand. And now we're moving over to Greece. So this is lamb kleftiko. And this was originally a dish that was made underground. And now the way it's typically cooked is in parchment paper and then inside in the oven. And you can even cover that in an oven safe dish. And here we have the American lamb, either loin or shoulder. So those lean cuts of meat that I mentioned, lots of vegetables, and you can choose. Typically it has potatoes, and then it could be whatever's in season. Here I used onions and red peppers, sweet red peppers. There's garlic and citrus in there as well. There's olive oil, which again has the monounsaturated fatty acids, often served with bread, which brings you a grain. And then you can choose to top it with a little bit of feta, which will be definitely less than 7 ounces on that dairy. So that right there is giving you 5 points on that Mediterranean point scale. And again, like I mentioned, spices and herbs, including Greek flavors like lemon, oregano, thyme, and garlic. And it really feels like you've traveled to the Greek islands when you have this dish. Next slide.
Can I ask you a question really quick, Sabrina?
Yeah, absolutely.
On the Mediterranean point scale, I think it was dairy was less than 7 ounces. Is that daily or per serving?
Daily. Yes. So all of those recommendations are daily. Yeah, good question. All right. So now I'm going to transition in a short bit. We are going to make a plant-forward American lamb burger. And for that one, we're using ground American lamb. And then I'm also making an American lamb shakshuka. And again, using American lamb loin, again, very lean. You can also use a leg or shoulder on this. And I'm get my groceries at a grocery store where the butcher was very kind and cubed everything for me, which was always helps the process along. And what I love about the grocery store is they know exactly where the farm the lamb came from. So it always feels really good. So we're going to get started on the cooking here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start on the shakshuka because that needs to simmer for a little while. And so again, shakshuka is the term is eggs and tomato sauce. And in this case, I added, you can do it with ground lamb as well, but I loved the texture that having those larger pieces of lamb brought in there. So I have, if you see, you should see 2 screens, one with my face and one with my cutting board. So I've been heating up one of my cast iron skillets, and you can do it in your heaviest pan that you have. And I have this beautiful cubed lamb right here. And I really like to think of making pieces that are the size that I'd want to put in my mouth, and thinking of that from a culinary standpoint every time I'm cooking, that I'm really thinking about the end point of how I'm going to enjoy this. So I have my pan here. I'm just going to brush it with a little bit of olive oil just to coat the pan a little bit. And if I was using a cut of lamb that was not as lean, it would render a lot more fat. But again, on purpose, I'm choosing a leaner cut. So I'm just coating it just the bottom. And then all I'm doing with these is I'm getting them browned. I'm just turning it up just a little bit to get more of a sizzle. And that will heat up in just a little bit. And while that's heating up, actually, I'm going to show you the ingredients that we're going to be using for this dish. So here we have a lot of color. And here we have red peppers, we have onion diced, we have white beans, so you can use cannellini or northern, and these are canned beans, and I just rinsed them to get rid of any extra sodium. A little bit of parsley, that's going to top our dish. Crushed tomatoes, which we see here. And then we have these gorgeous, gorgeous spices. I'm going to bring that around. So for this dish, and what makes shakshuka just so, it's often used as a brunch dish. So you can have it room temperature or warm. So we're using garlic, and you can use garlic powder or whole garlic. I find sometimes, even though I love this, I just want to use garlic powder. It's easier. I always have it, but I enjoy using both. We have some ground cumin and ground coriander, and these I ground myself because there's more of a fresh flavor, but again, you don't need to do that step. You can have it ground already. And then I'm using cayenne pepper. So what these dishes, these spices do is not only do they bring health properties, but they also give this depth of flavor. When I think of cooking, I think of having almost like a symphony. And every time I'm bringing in a different ingredient. So for example, the tomatoes here are giving me some acidity, fifth sense of taste. So now I can hear my pan sizzling. I'm going to add single layer, not overcrowding my pan. And I'm just putting my lamb there. And all I'm getting here, you don't need to cook it all the way. You're just trying to get a nice brown on both sides. And what that browning is called is the Maillard effect, which gives flavor. Essentially, browning is flavor. And it's essentially a caramelization of the natural sugars and the proteins. Just washing my hands real quick. So those are browning there. And a little bit of magic of television here on the lower pan. If I'm doing this at home, I would use the same pan, but here we're going to use an extra pan. So I have another one already sizzling here with my onions and my red peppers. And I just want to render those down. They got a little bit brown, that's fine. They're not burnt at all. So I'm caramelizing my onions and my red peppers again with just a tiny bit of olive oil just to coat it. And from there, now I'm going to add my tomato sauce, my crushed tomatoes. And now all my spices. So I'm adding, like I said, my cumin, coriander, cayenne pepper for heat. If you do not like heat, you can use sweet paprika. If you still don't want heat, but you want a little more smoky flavor, you can use smoked paprika. That's my garlic powder. Again, my way to get out of mincing a little garlic today. And I'm just going to mix that up. And here I'm showing a half recipe, but in the recipe you'll see on the website in the next couple of days, you'll have the full recipe. And again, crushed red tomatoes, I always get low sodium if at all possible. Anytime I can control the sodium, it's gonna give me control over how much salt is going to my what I'm choosing to eat. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to add any salt, because I want to add salt just to augment the flavor. But I don't want to make it salty, and I want to choose how much salt, not whoever made the food. I'm just going to flip these over a little bit. You see a little browning already happening there. And with the stew, essentially almost the tomato, I'm just going to cover that up and getting it to simmer. And the nice thing, when we think about tomatoes, sometimes people will ask, am I getting more health from a raw tomato or a cooked tomato? And the beautiful thing with that is if I'm eating a raw tomato, I'm getting a lot more of the vitamin C. Whereas if I am having it cooked, then the lycopene becomes much more bioavailable. So the answer is variety is the spice of life. So having some raw and some cooked is really what helps here. So hopefully you can see we have a little bit of browning taking effect. I'll put this up to the screen a little bit. You can see some nice Maillard effect occurring there. And that's, again, it's going to be simmering with my other food, so I don't need it to cook all the way through. But when you cook lamb, you want to get to about 145 degrees. Once you've cooked get more comfortable in the kitchen, you'll know what that is, but you feel free to put a thermometer in there if that makes you feel more comfortable. All right, so we have that sizzling away. And here we are getting close to simmering. So on the side, again, I have not added my beans. These were for show. Again, I've already put those in there and sizzling away. We'll move those out of the way. And I have pre-cracked my eggs. We're gonna simmer those in our sauce once it's simmering. I just put those off to the side. And while that is doing its thing, I am going to now show you guys the beginning of our burgers. So for these, we are actually using more of those white beans that I'm gonna mash. But before I actually start talking about the burger, I just want to talk about blended burgers in general. Blended burgers are a fantastic way if somebody really enjoys lamb or other meats and they realize, okay, I want to add more vegetables, but I don't know how to do it. A blended burger is really a fantastic way, like this burger is called Plant Forward Burger, where you're still using your ground lamb, but now I'm adding cut up mushrooms. If you're not a mushroom person, you could double the amount of beans instead of the mushrooms. But I do encourage, for those of you that are out there that aren't mushroom lovers, what mushrooms have is that meaty texture. And again, I minced it really tiny and it just adds moisture to this and makes it feel lighter. And again, bringing different nutrients in. So I'm adding that to my ground lamb. And then I have onion. And all the exact measurements will be in the recipe that will be available to you. Again, really small dice, like smaller than you normally would do it. I'm adding that.
Could you use this mixture for something else than like a lamb patty? Like, could you do meatballs or something?
Absolutely. Yes, meatballs are great. And sometimes for the meatballs, you could add ideally whole wheat breadcrumbs, or usually what I do is, even though I do really complex cooking, somehow I burn toast or I over toast my toast too often, and I actually keep it and blend that and use that as my breadcrumbs. It just adds more moisture. You could also use ground nuts to add a little more moisture. So I would do the same mix, but I would just add, again, a grain or ground nuts in there as well. And to give you an idea, mushrooms, this was the weight of the mushrooms that we did. So it ends up being about half a cup of mushrooms. And yes, again, dicing it really, really tiny. And I'm adding a little bit of pepper, about 5 cranks of pepper. I'm adding salt, and I always measure my salt and my oil because those two tend to pass a little bit. And then a little bit of Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire sauce, it is salty, so I'm thinking about that. I have 2 sources of salt, which is one of the reasons I use very little kosher salt. And then the Worcestershire also brings in that umami that we talked about, kind of that depth of flavor. And then last, I'm going to add those beans, which I'm going to mash up, and you do this really easily with a fork. And again, depending how much you love your beans, you might want them less mashed or more mashed. But again, how many points do we have here? So we have your whole meat, and we're making a lot of patties. So this would give us a point for the American lamb. We have a vegetable with our mushrooms. We have another one with our onion. And then we have a legume here with our beans. And I'm gonna put those in there. And again, just a reminder, canned beans are absolutely fine to use. Just make sure you rinse them because it gets rid of any extra salt that you don't want. All right, so before I get my hands dirty, we got the nice, I turned off my stove on the on our cubes. This is starting to simmer over here for my shakshuka, and I can smell, I wish this is where I wish it was 4D, where I could give you guys samples as I'm cooking, because I can smell my kitchen starting to smell absolutely delicious with all those Mediterranean spices. And I'm just going to let it simmer just a little bit more. So while it's doing that, and this, notice I'm doing 2 dishes at the same time. And yes, I do this a lot, but the nice thing about a shakshuka is once it's simmering, it can sit there and you could do some dishes while you're doing this. So not to feel overwhelmed that you're doing this really complex dish. So you can see there, just as a reminder, we have our mushrooms, onions, beans, the American lamb, and then just a little bit of salt, pepper, and the Worcestershire sauce. So really simple as far as the ingredients, and that's purposeful. One of the things I love about American lamb is the depth of flavor that it naturally has. So now I'm gonna mix all this up with my hands. And yes, hands are one of our best tools we have. in the kitchen.
Is there a mushroom or a specific bean you would recommend, or can you like interchange them?
So essentially, it could be any mushroom you want. Um, you could even use dried mushrooms, but it would be a much stronger flavor. But I would go with fresh mushrooms, but it could be absolutely any mushroom you want. I definitely would not use, really fancy chanterelle mushrooms on this, but you could do white mushrooms or brown mushrooms, trumpet. If you go to the farmer's market, they often have a medley bag, and that would work really well. And then for the beans, it could be any beans. I've just gotten used to using white beans for this, but you could use any type of beans. Yeah, so the beautiful thing, I mean, you want to mix it throughout because you want each patty to have, all the ingredients that you have in there. And then once you have it there, you're going to make your patties. I'm going to turn on my griddle here. I'll show you guys that over here. We'll move over a little bit. There we go. You'll see the griddle in just a second. There we go. Okay. And here, if you've never weighed or just have an idea of portion sizes, I do encourage you to weigh your patties. And with a pound of the American lamb with all these vegetables added, you end up getting 5 patties out of it, like 5 good sized patties. Oh, I'm going to brush. Same thing again. I have a griddle. Because there's more moisture in these, they do tend to stick a little bit more. So you could do this on the grill outside. I am using an indoor griddle here, and I'm just brushing it with olive oil just to prevent it from sticking. And again, I'm being conscious of what oil I'm using to brush it with. All right.
Is there like a secondary oil you would recommend? Is there anything else that's?
Yes. Yeah. So essentially the oils I tend to use at my house is, well, of course, I've talked about olive oil. And then I also use sunflower oil or canola oil. They have a high smoke point, and they also have really good ratio of the fats that it has in it. For things where so if I make, for example, air pop popcorn, which is a whole grain, and I'm putting some oil on afterwards, that's when I'll use something like avocado oil. That has a really high price point, so I don't want to use it if I'm not going to be eating it all. Like right now, some's going to stay on the pan, but I call it kind of the Rolls Royce of oils. So avocado is great for that, for popcorn glue, so to speak. But for this, olive oil does have a flavor to it, which I enjoy, so I use that. But otherwise, canola, sunflower would be my other to go. All right, so we got our patty. I'm just going to put it right on there, and I hear it sizzling a little bit. And magically, I have another patty made right next to me, so we'll put that on there. And then I'm going to wash my hands real quick. Now for the shakshuka here, we have this is simmering nice and bubbly over here. And now I'm going to gently add my beans. And these are whole. I did not mash these. And I'm also going to add my meat. And again, it's not cooked all the way through, just nice and brown on both sides. And these, when I got from the butcher, I felt like some of the pieces were a little bit big, so I just cut them for my liking. We're just going to stir that and gently stirring. I don't want to mash my beans here. I just want everything coated nicely. And you can hear the sizzle, hopefully, of those burgers. And now what I'm going to do now, and this is a really fun thing about simmering. So I'm making 2 wells in my dish here. They don't have to be perfect, but again, I'm making a half recipe here. So if you're making a whole one and using a full size cast iron, like a 10 or 12 inch or whatever pan you're using, it's good for 4 eggs. And I encourage you to pre-crack your eggs into separate containers. Yes, it makes slightly more dishes, but at least this way you're not cracking it into your pan and now you have eggshells that you're picking out. And again, this is so we have 3 sources of protein in this dish. So we have your eggs, we have the American lamb, and then we also have the white beans. So I'm putting them in the wells. And now I'm going to cover that up. And essentially, I'm continuing to simmer. And that simmering just makes those flavors meld that much more. And the covering helps that egg essentially cook. So we're getting a poached egg in there. The goal is to have the whites be cooked and the middle part to be really jammy, the yolk. And then our burger, again, magic of television. So what you want to get to is about 2 to 3 minutes per side. And you want to get these nice grill marks. I mean, you don't need the grill marks, but it sure just looks extra delicious when you have those. And now we're going to plate our lamb burger. And just, again, I have a pre-made one for the magic of television here, but I do want to share with you guys that because there's more water content, like I said, I'm going to flip this one. You see on the very corner of your screen, I'm kind of moving the spatula around, but I'm getting underneath it carefully. And you don't want to touch it right away. When you first put meat on a pan, it's going to stick. So when I put my lamb, no matter what it is, if it's ground lamb or otherwise, it's going to stick to the pan, and we want it to stay there. We don't want to move it around because we want that Maillard effect to happen. But now it's been 2-3 minutes, it starts naturally releasing, and now I can flip it. And there we have our grill marks. We have this other one here, I'm going to flip. And we'll keep that cooking. And now I'm going to plate the one that's already made here for us. So what we have is I have my bun. Oh, let me move this over. Losing you guys here. Okay. So I have my toasted bun, and I, on purpose, got a whole wheat bun. And when you're looking at whole wheat breads or breads in general, you want it to have at least 3 grams of fiber per serving. And I always check that because, again, if I'm choosing to have a whole grain bread, I really want to make sure I'm getting the health benefits from it. And there's some dishes that just are meant to be not with whole wheat, but this one is this is a great dish that goes with it. Now I'm going to put my patty next. And when I make burgers, my family laughs at me of how 3-dimensional it is. So we have our patty, and now we're going to put some lettuce, very traditional. I'm going to put some tomato, and there's still some gorgeous heirloom tomatoes. I feel like it's every time I eat one right now, I think about how it's the end of season. I just have to relish it that much more. And now to add even more flavor and more from the plant kingdom, in that same griddle, or you can do it outside, I grilled some red peppers, some zucchini, some eggplant, which again, I'm adding more colors, more from the plant kingdom. And last, this is kind of the magic sauce. I'm actually adding feta cheese. Feta and lamb go so well together. And you have this gorgeous 3-dimensional burger. You can see the American lamb, our ground lamb. We have lettuce, the fresh tomato, the grilled vegetables, that feta cheese, and then our whole wheat bun. We'll see if it decides to stay upright. Yeah, so there's our burger. And we'll see how we're doing here with our shakshuka. And if there are any questions, this is a great time for questions. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. So again, feel free to unmute if you have questions. I want to tell you guys, one of the reasons when we're developing recipes is if you are somebody that doesn't eat lamb very often, it seems intimidating, or just that sense of making that financial decision to buy something that you're just not sure. That is one of the reasons that I wanted to do 2 recipes with each of the cuts. So if you buy a pound of ground beef and making the lob with half of it and making the burgers with the other half is a great way to explore something new. Also, when you make that blended burger, the price point's going to come down, right? So you're evening out from the meat, the cost of the lamb versus the vegetables. So you're not only, the flavors are so different when you add these others. It feels lighter. But it really is incredible how the flavors change. So yeah, perfect. So
Dr. Falquier. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Courtney. I just had a quick question about whole intact grains. Is that quinoa? Is that rice? What is the list of those?
Yeah, so there are at least over 3 dozen whole grains that I can think of just right off the top of my head. Rice is one of them. So essentially, white rice is not an intact grain. The husk has been removed. But when you get to brown rice, red rice, forbidden rice, that's the darker you get with your rice, the higher your fiber and the higher your protein naturally. And then yes, things like quinoa, millet, teff. Teff is used a lot for injera, which is eaten with Ethiopian food, kind of that spongy bread that we get. You can actually buy the whole grain form and make make almost like a porridge. It's a little bit more savory than you have with oatmeal, but all of those are whole grains. Yes. So incorporating those, and I always say buy a small container. So if it's something you've never experienced before, if you buy by the bulk, that way you're not left with a forever size and maybe your household didn't like it.
Thank you.
All right, I'm waiting for these little eggs to be enjoyed, fully cooked here. As you can see, they're starting, if you can see on the bottom of the screen, they're starting to get a little more cooked, and you just have to be patient with this part of it. You can also stick them in the oven if you want to, you know, especially it's quite warm here still in San Diego, so I didn't want to go there, but we are getting that beautiful, beautiful flavor. And this is finishing the cooking of the lamb as well.
How do you know when your lamb for the shakshuka is fully cooked through? Are you use a thermometer?
You know, you can, usually with time, because it's in there at least 30 minutes, it's essentially the longer, the more tender it's going to get. But again, to be extra safe, you can go in there. Lamb is cooked a lot with the temperature recommendations are a lot like beef if people are more used to cooking with beef. So there's a lot more leeway than you would have with chicken as far as health concerns. Yeah, so 145. If you want to err on the side of caution, definitely use that thermometer. Thank you, Courtney.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions rolling?
What's your favorite lamb dish?
You know, I gotta say, the lob was so mouth-watering. And there's somebody on this call who was one of my tasters for that dish, and she also said it was absolutely magical. She was, yeah, it's just all of us were just taken aback with, again, that how the acidity mixed so perfectly with the ground lamb and really brought out the just absolutely beautiful. And then the burger is pretty darn delicious too. I'm pretty proud of all the dishes, I must say. I was really, the Cleftico is so interesting, the story of it, that it was actually people were stealing the sheep, and that's why they were being cooked underground, because then you couldn't smell the sheep being cooked. And that tradition of cooking underground stayed. And this was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So part of the reason I love recipe developing is learning the history of where these dishes originated, and to do them justice with the history of where they came from. And for example, like for the lamb lob, I used white rice for that, even though I know it's not a whole grain, because that is the traditional dish. And I know throughout the day and throughout the week, I'm going to get those whole grains. So I want to honor a dish for the way it was intended to be made without vilifying, like, oh no, I'm having a processed grain. But again, the processed grain of white rice is very different than an ultra processed meal. Like, I don't want to make any enemies right now.
Did you see the chat?
I did see, yeah. Is there a daily number goal for the Mediterranean diet? So you definitely don't have to go for A+, Jessica. Really thinking of what, kind of doing an inventory of one's own eating patterns and where one is at, and to realize, so for example, the alcohol. So that one, essentially, you don't get a point if you're drinking, several glasses of wine per day. And maybe you look at the points and say, you know what, I've kind of realized I'm drinking more than my body that's recommended for my body, and I'm going to work on that one. So that might be your goal. So it's really, you don't have to go for A+, but it's that improvement of that 2-point improvement that really helps the risk of death.
Can you clarify Mediterranean diet? So they are suggesting a glass of wine or something a day?
Yes. Yeah. So and what's interesting, so that study again came out in 2003, and the recommendations continue to evolve. And there's actually more studies that have come out in the last few years actually showing that the less alcohol, the better. And Canada actually changed their national recommendations on alcohol to be really the least amount possible. But to go back to that study, the recommendations were a glass of alcohol for women per day, so 7 per week, but again, not to be saved for the weekend, and 2 per day for men. And one alcoholic beverage is either 5 ounces of wine, and it doesn't matter if it's white or red, 1 ounce of hard spirits, or a 12-ounce beer. So that also changed. Before we had the sense it was only red wine that had the health properties, but we realized it's actually something in the alcohol itself that actually, with those smaller amounts, the studies show that it decreased risk of heart disease. And it's a U-shaped curve. So it doesn't mean more is better, right? Yeah. But that's the way I like to think about, like, that plate. I almost say if I had a tattoo, I would have put that on my forehead, but then I realized I wouldn't be able to read it. But that plate of really thinking when you're going shopping, and realizing that sometimes when we go to the farmer's market, we have all this energy and we get so excited of all the things that we might be able to make. So we over purchase, and then we get home and we're exhausted, and then it goes bad in our fridge. So prepare. So getting things at the farmer's market, fabulous. Getting your American lamb, and realizing if you realize your week got busier than you thought, you can put it in the freezer, and then you're not wasting the food. And also realizing there are going to be days that you're really tired. So if you do make like the patties, you could freeze already made as patties and then take them out when you want to grill them. So you've already done all the chopping on one day, but you can go from there. And other times you can have, again, the lob, the cliftico, all of those actually freeze really well. So you could do a big portion and then freeze it. And then a day when you're not feeling as motivated in the kitchen, you can come back and thaw it, and you've been your own incredible chef from a few weeks ago.
I have a question, Dr. Sabrina.
Yes. Hola, Rosa Maria.
Hi. I eat a lot of lamb, and it's usually from New Zealand.
Okay.
So where do I find American lamb? I never hear about American lamb before.
Yeah, so American lamb, you can actually get it, and it's grown in all states. It's raised in all states, and you can, at the grocery store, wherever you're buying it, you can actually specifically ask for American lamb. And it'll be, my experience has been that sometimes one grocery store will have more local, like American lamb, whereas other grocery stores will find that are farther away. So you can ask your butcher, and they'll be honest with you where the lamb comes from. Courtney, you might have some more to say on that one.
Yeah, I was gonna ask where you live.
I live in San Diego.
San Diego? Okay.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's a pretty good area for it. But if you're ever having any difficulty, we have a section on our website called Where to Buy. And there's some national retailers that you can order online and they'll ship it to you. Or you can reach out to us directly and we'll help identify some local farmers in the area. I'm just pulling up California. So these are the retailers we have listed for California. Molly Stone's, Lunardi's, Andronico's, Raleigh's, Bristol Farms, and Gelson's. I don't know if you shop at any of those.
No, I usually shop in regular stores like Vons and Henry's.
Yeah, those might be a little bit more specialty, but they should have American lamb.
Okay, I'll look for it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have you heard about this this new thing with cell meat where it's being reproduced? I know chicken has been doing it. It's in chicken nuggets, which we don't
That
eat.
sounds nasty.
I saw an article about it, and it's just horrible that reproducing this kind of stuff. And I was just wondering if you had heard about it. What I'm sure you don't condone it, but
It's interesting. I haven't heard about it specifically in meat products, but there's a lot of movement, of course, to the meat substitutes. And those are incredibly processed. So I would err on the side of caution. Sometimes there's this health halo that we put over when things are made from plants. But for example, again, burgers that are made with plants, but they're so processed that you dig deeper into the ingredients that are in it and the sodium levels and otherwise, that, like, when we go back to the nutritional facts that we looked at with this American lamb, that when you go to the whole meat and we know what that sheep has eaten and the life that it's had, the nutritional properties often are healthier from a whole meat like we've been looking at today rather than a meat substitute. So that's something just to keep in mind.
We don't eat anything like that in the South.
Okay.
We really do Mediterranean. Not as good as what you're showing. But I just had one more question too. You've been talking about these other dishes. I never heard those words before. Or before lob or something with an L.
Lob, yeah. Yeah, it's funny because you can either spell it, Courtney and I were talking about this before the call. So the traditional way, so the way I started to get to know lamb lob was actually at Thai restaurants as an appetizer. And it's, again, very light. You often make essentially lettuce wraps with it, or the cucumber. So it's super light. And what I had never seen was one with lamb. And as soon as I got the call to work on these recipes, that was actually the first one that came to mind because of that beautiful symphony of the flavor combinations. And I did experiment with freezing it because I wasn't sure how it would do. It did great. I added some extra scallions on top to give it more of that fresh color. The flavor stayed absolutely sublime. So quite easy to make, actually. So that's that one. And again, it's just such a beautiful dish of really bringing out the fresh flavors of Thailand, and I just love it. And the cliftico, you see the wrapping of it there on the upper left on the picture. That again is something that it wasn't until I was researching for this project that I came across it. And I love the idea, especially on a cold day where maybe you're home and cozy. It's such a hands-off way of cooking where the magic's happening in the oven after you've done some rough chopping. And what comes out is just comfort. And to realize you can get comfort and it can be nutritionally dense and absolutely fantastic for your body. That to me is the winning number there.
The top dish to the right, there's cucumbers in it. Are those kefir leaves or something like that?
No, those are actually it's like a miniature romaine lettuce.
Okay.
And I just love the shape of it because you can fill it with it. But you could use any greens you want there. I just love the lightness of a really crunchy lettuce in that with the cucumbers also, then with the more rich the lob flavor. Yeah,
looks very nice. Everything
good. I'm glad. And they're just, again, I think that's part of with culinary medicine, and hopefully you can see with these colors is, yes, I'm a physician, and sometimes there's like, oh, she's going to teach me how to eat healthy, and it's, this quotes and it's this diet feeling of being deprived, and that's why I emphasize even from the beginning of the talk that having people truly enjoy their food and not feel like, okay, if I'm going to be healthier, I have to deprive myself. It's truly to understand. And again, do that inventory of saying, wow, I really don't eat enough vegetables, or, and then to find, are there dishes? Like maybe you went to Greece and you experience cliftico, and then you get excited to bring it back home. Or sometimes food can take you places from your own space. And often, and this has happened to me over the years, that I enjoy cooking so much that sometimes it's harder to go out for dinner because I'm much pickier with the food that I eat. So, but that's a good thing. And to have pleasure be, first and foremost. And I want to say with the burger, you can see how three-dimensional it is on that lower left side. You can put some of those vegetables on the side, right? So if you have the grill on, and I always encourage, if you have the grill on and you're cooking your plant-forward blended burgers, and you have the whole grill, put some vegetables on that are, that are to your liking, and they go in a second. It is amazing how, if you serve them for yourself or if you're feeding others as well, how people eat them just like you would chips or otherwise. So just a little tip of ways to get some more of that plant kingdom in your life.
Great. Thank you, Sabrina. Everything looks great. Wait, I had one question about the shakshuka. How do you serve it?
You just scoop it. Essentially,
Okay.
So I think, if I had a lot of real estate in my house, I would probably get individual size cast iron skillets, because each person having their own would be perfect. But otherwise, I serve it in a bowl. like a shallow bowl, and then I just scoop out a big piece. So each person gets an egg with a lot of the pieces underneath. And then I often serve it with some crusty bread, my favorite crusty bread. In the winter, I make bread myself, so I would serve it with my own bread with my starter, but the weather's been too hot to have the oven that long.
I might ask you to send me some sourdough starter.
There you go.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. I hope you learned a little bit and feel inspired to cook with some American lamb. Before we let you go, we did say we were going to give away some lamb. We're giving away a boneless leg, so you can recreate the shakshuka or the cleftico, and then also some ground lamb, so you can do one of the other recipes as well. And I just had a random name generator pick a name, and Connie is our winner. So Connie, I'll reach out to you after this and get your address and everything, and we'll get that to you ASAP. And then lastly, all these recipes will be published to theamericanlamb.com tomorrow. But if you forget to go look it up, I'm also going to send you all an email with links to the recipes. Thank you so much, Sabrina. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you so much. And I know I can stay on for a little longer if anyone has any more questions. But again, thank you so much for coming on this culinary medicine journey and really looking at American lamb in a way that some people might not have thought about it before. So truly a pleasure. Thank you so much for your attention and your time, and hopefully some inspiration. If not, maybe there's a little drooling going on to whatever's for dinner.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and end it, Sabrina.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night.